LLM-as-Judge falls to confident idiot problem. Using a large language model to grade the outputs of another LLM, so-called LLM-as-a-Judge, has become an industry standard for catching hallucinations and errors in AI agents. But a growing chorus of practitioners argues this approach creates a dangerous circular dependency. If the underlying models suffer from sycophancy or hallucination, the judge model often hallucinates a passing grade. As one developer put it, this is trying to fix probability with more probability. The proposed alternative is refreshingly old school, deterministic assertions. Instead of asking an LLM if a URL is valid, just run request.get. Instead of asking if a SQL query is safe, parse the abstract syntax tree. If the code says no, the agent stops, regardless of how confident the LLM is. The naive defense of LLM-as-a-Judge rests on probability theory. If one model errs 20% of the time, two independent models should only share the same error 4% of the time. But critics point out that errors are often highly correlated, a phenomenon known as common mode failure. If both the agent and judge were trained on similar data, or if the prompt is tricky, they tend to drift in the exact same direction and high-five each other over the same cliff. Experiments with Hugging Face's FineWeb Edu dataset annotation bear this out. Different LLMs, Llama 3, Mixtral variants, produced similar scores, and averaging them just shifted the distribution rather than improving quality. One researcher noted that training on jury-annotated data performed worse than using a classifier based on Llama 3 annotations alone, likely because jury-based approaches retain more low-quality samples. Some practitioners have found workarounds, using a deliberately different model as the judge and prompting it to review input as if it was a bad but shrewd student can push the judge to be stricter. Others suggest examining activation vectors in the model's latent space for signs of uncertainty, high entropy or competing activation patterns, before escalating to a larger model. But for objective verifiable checks, is this URL 404? Does this PII exist? Simple scripts remain 100x safer than LLM judges. The consensus is clear. LLM-as-a-Judge has its place for qualitative checks like tone or helpfulness, but for anything deterministic, code beats vibes every time. Prompt kernels and local model wrangling. The local LLM community continues to grapple with the challenge of getting small models to behave consistently. One recent approach, Operator Mech v2.5, is a compact YAML-based prompt framework designed to force 7 BTB quantized models into a fixed output schema, extracting stance, tension, and actionable steps without chain-of-thought leaks or persona drift. The framework is explicitly mechanical. Read for structure, not vibes, keep output compact, and never include reasoning outside defined fields. The creator has also released extension modules for compression, token guardrails, and context stabilization for models with limited context windows. Reception has been mixed. Some commenters dismissed the approach as AI psychosis or galaxy brain nonsense, while others pointed out that prompts don't truly force anything, they just constrain probabilistically. The creator responded that the goal is simply to make small models behave more predictably, not to invent a new ontology. A wrapper doesn't create magic, it creates constraints. For users of Ollama, LM Studio, or similar local inference tools, structured output wrappers like this can help stabilize outputs, especially for data extraction or automation tasks. The debate highlights a recurring tension in the local LLM scene. How much can clever prompting compensate for model limitations, and when does it veer into wishful thinking? FP8 quantization brings big models to small GPUs. Quantization, the art of compressing model weights to fit in less memory, continues to unlock new possibilities for local inference. A new FP8 quantized version of RNJ1 Instruct, an 8B instruction model, cuts VRAM requirements from 16 gigabits to 8 gigabits with only about a 1% drop in benchmark scores. 87.2% on GSM-8K, math reasoning, 44.5% on MMLU Pro, multi-domain knowledge, and 55.3% on IFEVAL, instruction following. This means the model can now run on an RTX 3060 12 gigabit, pushing the boundary of what's possible on consumer hardware. The trade-off is clear. For a 50% reduction in VRAM, you sacrifice less than a percentage point on most benchmarks. Hardware compatibility varies. RTX 3060 users can expect around 50 tokens per second at 8K context, while an RTX 4090 can push 120 tokens per second at 32K context. Not everyone is impressed with the underlying model's conversational quality, very weak in some users' experience, but the quantization itself is well executed. One caveat, llama.cpp doesn't yet support the RNJ architecture, though a pull request is open. For now, VLLM is the recommended backend. Linux Foundation launches Agentic AI Foundation. The Linux Foundation has announced the formation of the Agentic AI Foundation, AAIF, anchored by new project contributions including Model Context Protocol MCP, Goose, and Agents.md. MCP Model Context Protocol is a standard for how agents interact with context and tools, and its inclusion signals growing interest in formalizing agentic workflows. OpenAI is reportedly joining the foundation, which has raised eyebrows in the open source community. Critics are skeptical. As one commenter put it, instead of opening models, training data, or anything that would meaningfully shift power toward the community, the companies involved are donating lightweight artifacts. They're useful, but they're also the safest, least threatening pieces of their ecosystem to open. The move is seen by some as a strategic attempt to lock in influence over emerging standards before truly open projects can define the space, smoke and mirrors in the language of openness. Others drew parallels to the era of SOAP and WSDL, warning that those who fail to learn from history are destined to repeat it. Meanwhile, the proliferation of nearly identical MCP servers on GitHub, many just forks with minor changes, underscores the need for better curation and trust signals in the ecosystem. The name chosen is also conflicting with the existing Agentic's foundation. DeepSeek v3.2 claims gold at Math and Programming Olympiads. DeepSeek has released v3.2, and the results are striking. Gold medal scores on IMO 2025, the International Mathematical Olympiad, and IOI 2025, the International Olympiad in Informatics, plus second place at the ICPC World Finals. The model reportedly beats GPT-5 on math and reasoning benchmarks. Weights are available on Hugging Face under an MIT license, though the Speciala variant that achieved the gold medals is API only and set to expire on December 15th. There's a catch. At 671B parameters, MOE with 37B active, this is not a laptop-friendly model. But what's interesting is the context. DeepSeek achieved this while banned from buying the latest NVIDIA chips, forcing innovation on efficiency rather than brute force compute. The accompanying paper describes a sparse attention mechanism that cuts inference costs by roughly 50% for long contexts. For the local LLM community, the base model may not replicate the Speciale's competition results, but the engineering advances are worth studying, and the open weights are a welcome contribution. Navigating local LLMs for academic work. Newcomers to local LLMs often find the landscape overwhelming. Rankings abound, but practical guidance on which models fit which hardware is scarce. One graduate student seeking a local model for administrative tasks, LaTeX help, and secure work with confidential datasets received a wealth of advice from the community. For 1624 GB of RAM on an M4 Pro, recommendations included Qwen 3.4b with thinking and non-thinking variations, Qwen 3.8b, and the Mistral 3b, all of which can run locally with reasonable performance. Practical tips: prefer higher quantizations, avoid Q4, Q8 if you can fit larger, and consider tools like Mesty Studio for retrieval augmented generation, RAG, workflows. Google's Notebook LM, powered by Gemini, is another free option with strong privacy assurances for academic use. For those prioritizing data security, Nousewise was recommended for handling heavy documents and context without sending data off-device. The takeaway: the best model changes weekly, but for most academic tasks, a 4B, 8B model with MCP server tool use is a solid starting point. MCP servers and Codex branching workflows for agents. As agentic workflows become more sophisticated, developers are exploring how to compare outputs from different MCP server configurations and agents. One user asked whether Codex could generate multiple outputs, each using a different MCP server or agent, so they could review and merge the best result. The web version of Codex supports this, and some have had success prompting Codex to commit variations to different Git branches for later comparison. But experienced users caution against over-engineering. I don't recommend doing what you described for anything more than short MCP testing. It just looks good on paper, but in reality you waste tons of time comparing them when the success rate of your tools is highly random. The advice is pragmatic. Add only the MCP servers strictly required for the task, and don't expect miracles from multi-session comparisons. For swift development, the suggestion is to rely on the model's built-in knowledge or web search, with Xcode Docs MCP as a fallback for documentation. Axiom v.9 Claude Code Skills for Apple Intelligence. Apple developers working with Claude Code now have a new suite of skills, commands, and references for Apple Intelligence development. Axiom v.9 adds comprehensive support for the foundation models framework, including patterns for preventing context overflow, blocking UI, and avoiding manual JSON parsing when structured output should be used. The toolkit covers iOS 26+, macOS 26+, iPadOS 26+, and visionOS 26+, targeting Apple's on-device 3B language model with a FORT96 token context window. Included are diagnostic skills for troubleshooting context-exceeded errors, guardrail violations, and availability issues, as well as reference materials for language model session, streaming, tool calling, and dynamic schemas. For app intents, Axiom now covers Siri, shortcuts, Spotlight, and automations, including Mac-specific triggers and rich text support. The project is free and open source, and the maintainer reports it has significantly improved their own iOS development workflow. Depth Anything 3 Geometry from Any View. ByteDance's seed team has released Depth Anything 3.3, a model that predicts spatially consistent geometry from arbitrary visual inputs, with or without known camera poses. The key insight: a vanilla vision encoder, like Dino, is sufficient as a backbone, and a unified depth ray representation eliminates the need for complex multitask learning. DA3 significantly outperforms prior work for monocular depth estimation, multi-view depth estimation, and pose estimation. The model family includes flagship foundation models, from small to giant, a specialized metric depth estimator for real-world scale, and a dedicated high-quality relative monocular depth model. Applications range from real-time depth streaming in ROS2 for robotics to Blender and Comfy UI integrations for 3D reconstruction and creative pipelines. All models are trained exclusively on open data, and code and checkpoints are available on GitHub. For anyone working on 3D reconstruction, novel view synthesis, or robotics, DA3 is worth a look. Extracting credentials from MDT shares. A new tool on GitHub, MDTCred, is designed for extracting credentials from Microsoft Deployment Toolkit MDT shares. MDT is commonly used in enterprise environments for OS deployment, and misconfigurations can expose sensitive credentials. The tool is minimal, just a single purpose, but highlights an ongoing concern in enterprise security. Automated deployment tools often leave behind accessible secrets if not properly locked down. For red teamers and defenders alike, this is a reminder to audit deployment shares and restrict access. From Azure Functions to FreeBSD, a migration story. Cloud vendor lock-in remains a real risk, as one developer discovered after an unexpected Thanksgiving morning outage took down their Azure Functions-based web services. Faced with cryptic dashboard errors and the looming deprecation of Azure's Linux Consumption Plan, EOL September 2028, they decided to migrate to a self-hosted FreeBSD server, a second-hand ThinkStation with dual 36-core Xeons and 64 GB of RAM. The migration leveraged FreeBSD's Daemon 8 utility to inject configuration variables, run as an unprivileged user, and manage logging, all without modifying the original HTTP service code. Log rotation was handled by Newsyslog 8, and TLS termination was offloaded to Cloudflare Zero Trust tunnels. The result: all services now run in the author's garage with minimal code changes and no more reliance on opaque cloud dashboards. The lesson is evergreen: self-hosting is more viable than ever, and having hardware ready can turn a crisis into an opportunity. Optical context compression. Hype outpaces evidence. DeepSeek OCR recently demonstrated that rendered text can be reconstructed with high fidelity from a small number of vision tokens, sparking excitement about vision-based context compression for language models. But a new paper from researchers at NTU and elsewhere argues that the hype is outpacing the evidence. The authors tested two implicit assumptions: that vision-based compression provides unique advantages for text reconstruction, and that good reconstruction translates to useful language modeling. Comparing the vision encoder to simple alternatives, parameter-free mean pooling, and a learned hierarchical encoder, they found that these baselines match or surpass vision for reconstruction at matched compression ratios and outperform it for language modeling, where vision-based compression fails to beat simple truncation. The excitement around optical context compression outpaces the evidence, the authors conclude. Code and checkpoints are available for further investigation. The paper is a useful corrective to the field's enthusiasm for novel techniques before rigorous evaluation. GPL enforcement. Software Freedom Conservancy advances against Vizio. In a significant development for open-source licensing, a judge has signaled a win for the Software Freedom Conservancy in its GPL enforcement case against Vizio. The case centers on whether individual consumers, not just copyright holders, have standing to enforce the GPL's source code requirements. If upheld, this could open a new avenue for GPL enforcement, empowering end users to demand compliance. The outcome is still pending, but the signal is promising for advocates of software freedom. KDE on Raspberry Pi easier than you think. Raspberry Pi boards have matured. A quad-core Pi 5 with 8 or 16 gigabytes of RAM, NVMe, and all the wireless you'd expect is a capable desktop replacement. But the default Raspberry Pi OS still ships with the lightweight LXDE environment, which can feel constrained. A recent guide demonstrates that setting up KDE on Raspberry Pi OS requires only about a dozen command line steps. The process covers installation, switching the default desktop environment, and cleaning up the old LXDE packages. On the latest Trixie-based Pi OS, a few extra tweaks are needed. The result, a modern, full-featured desktop with only a modest performance penalty. For anyone with a powerful Pi gathering dust, it's a worthwhile upgrade. Comments in the community range from enthusiasm to skepticism about whether KDE offers meaningful advantages, but the consensus is that the barrier to entry is now vanishingly low. Masked diffusion models as energy minimization. A new paper from Renmin University and Huawei Noah's Ark Lab presents a systematic theoretical framework for masked diffusion models, MDMs, interpreting them as solutions to energy minimization problems in discrete optimal transport. The authors prove that three distinct energy formulations, kinetic, conditional kinetic, and geodesic, are mathematically equivalent under the MDM structure. MDMs minimize all three when the mask schedule satisfies a closed-form optimality condition. Practically, this means the notoriously ad hoc choice of mask schedule can now be reduced to a two-dimensional search via beta CDF parameterization. No retraining required. Experiments on synthetic and real-world benchmarks, language, code, math, show that energy-inspired schedules outperform handcrafted baselines, especially in few-step sampling. The paper bridges the gap between continuous diffusion theory and discrete MDMs, offering both theoretical insight and actionable improvements for practitioners. Sarlo 80, Optics and Language in One Dataset. Onera, the French aerospace lab, has released Sarlo 80, a multimodal dataset pairing high-resolution synthetic aperture radar imagery with geometrically aligned optical data and natural language descriptions. SAR uses microwaves instead of visible light, enabling imaging through clouds and at any time of day, critical for applications like disaster response, agriculture, and environmental monitoring. The dataset was curated from Umbra SAR acquisitions, resampled to 80 centimeter resolution in slant range geometry, and split into overlapping patches. Each SAR patch is paired with a co-registered optical crop and 3 captions generated by CogVLM2 and refined with Qwen LLM. The result is a foundation for training multimodal models that jointly understand radar, optical, and language data. Applications include image-to-image translation, change detection, and scene captioning, areas where combining radar's structural insights with optical and textual context can yield richer, more resilient representations. DevStrawl 2 and Nambe 4.3b, new agentic and reasoning models. Mistral AI has released DevStral 2 123B Instruct, an agentic LLM designed specifically for software engineering tasks. The model excels at tool use, multi-file editing, and codebase exploration, achieving 72.2% on C-Bench verified, competitive with much larger models. The release is accompanied by Mistral Vibe, a CLI tool for leveraging DevStral directly in the terminal, with support for scaffoldings like Klein, KiloCode, and OpenHands. Meanwhile, Nanbeg 4.3b brings strong reasoning capabilities to the lightweight end of the spectrum. 23 T tokens of pre-training, 30 mem plus SFT samples, and multi-stage reinforcement learning yield a 3B model that scores 60.0 on Arena Hard v2 and achieves state-of-the-art on BFCL v4 among open-source models under 32B. Both base and thinking variants are available on Hugging Face, with a technical report on Arxiv. For those seeking local, privacy-preserving reasoning, Nanbeg 4.3b is worth benchmarking. GLab 04b, GUI Agents Go Local. StepFun AI has released GLab 04b Preview, a 4B GUI agent model designed to run on local computers and interact with Android devices via ADB. The model handles multi-step, long-horizon tasks across a variety of apps: food, transportation, shopping, social, and generalizes to unseen applications without app-specific adaptation. Inference is supported via Llama, with a companion repo for plug-and-play infrastructure. Key capabilities include GUI navigation, click, type, slide, wait, complex task execution, and open-world generalization. For researchers and hobbyists interested in building autonomous mobile agents, GLab 0 offers a low-barrier entry point. The project is part of a broader push to make agentic AI practical outside the cloud, enabling privacy-preserving automation on personal devices. Miles FS Deep 2 Megatron Performance, Less Complexity. Training large models efficiently usually means wrestling with Megatron's complexity and checkpoint conversion headaches. The SGLang team's Miles training framework now integrates FSDP2, delivering Megatron-level performance with minimal vendor lock-in. Experiments show numerical alignment with Megatron, and advanced features like context parallelism are supported out of the box. For those training custom models at scale or building on SGLang's serving stack, this is a significant quality-of-life improvement. The repo is clean, and users are enthusiastic. Megatron that does not require checkpoint conversion nor mbridge sounds very awesome. The move toward flexible, high-performance distributed training backends is a welcome trend for the open-source ML community.